Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What the Fuck Are We Doing? It has been a hot minute since our last episode, and few things has happened in between. As you can realize, it's only me doing the podcast. Corinne, hi. Unfortunately, my co-star or co-host, whatever you want to call it, cannot join me at this moment as I have moved. So I am about an hour and a half away from her. So we're still trying to figure it out. Maybe she'll join me again in a later stage, or perhaps she won't. We don't know. We'll just see. But anyway, since this is the first episode in almost 2 years or a year, I'm not even sure. I thought let's jump into the exciting case of Florence Maybrick. Now, Florence Maybrick was born Florence Elizabeth Chandler in Mobile, Alabama. She was the daughter of William George Chandler, a one time mayor of Mobile and a partner in the banking firm of St. John Powers and Company. And her mother was Caroline Chandler Dewberry. Florence's father unfortunately died before her birth, and her mother remarried a third time in 1872 to Baron Adolf von Rox, a cavalry officer in the 8th Cuirassier Regiment of the German Army. I do apologize if I just butchered that sentence, which I have a feeling I did. So, the Maybrick marriage started out on a very romantic note. So, Florence was a vivacious 17-year-old when she met James Maybrick on the Atlantic liner Baltic, on which she was sailing with her mother on a tour to Europe. She was quite a beautiful sight with curly golden hair, violet eyes, and a curvaceous body figure. James was the picture of a prosperous British businessman, tall, blonde, sophisticated, and self assured, and still a bachelor at the age of 42. That is correct, listeners. She was a 17-year-old, not even legal, and he was 42 years old. Old enough to be her father. But this was back in the 1800s. Things were done differently. Anyway, shall we continue? They walked along the deck under the stars, played cards together, and danced. By the end of the voyage, they were in love. So, on the 27th of July, 1881, the couple were married at St. James's Church, Piccadilly, in London. They settled in England in a 20-room mansion in Aigburth, Liverpool. They had 2 children and 5 servants and entertained lavishly. Florence made quite an impression on the social scene in Liverpool, and the Maybricks were usually to be found at the most important balls and functions, the very picture of a happy and successful couple. But James's business did not flourish, and their lifestyle soon outstripped their means. James tried to keep up the outward appearance by budgeting strictly inside the house. But Florence was not the budgeting type, and soon quarrels about money started. Florence was always on edge in case someone came knocking on the door asking for payment on a bill or an account. She also feared her husband returning from work finding out about another debt she made. In a letter to her mother, she wrote, and I quote, "I am in such a state of overstrained nervousness, I am hardly fit for anything. My life is a continual state of fear of something or somebody." Now, beside the money problems they were experiencing, James Maybrick was a hypochondriac who took endless pills and potions for his imaginary illnesses. After he was successfully treated for malaria with arsenic and patent medicines, containing poisonous chemicals, he took it to himself by dosing him and becoming addicted to pinches of arsenic with which he drank with beef tea. Now, it was easily available from the chemists, and many Victorian men acquired the dangerous habit. On top of this, now remember, it's the money, he's basically a drug addict, and now on top of all of this, he had a number of mistresses, one of whom bore him 5 children. Florence, meanwhile, increasingly unhappy in her marriage, entered into several liaisons of her own. One was with a local businessman, Alfred Brearley, which her husband was told about. A violent row ensued after Maybrick heard reports of Florence's relationship with Brearley, during which Maybrick assaulted her, leaving her with a blackened eye. Now, that is just the kind of double standards we can assume from back then. I mean, he had children with one of his mistresses, but because his wife did have a little affair on the side, he beat her up. Anyway, about a month later, in late April, Florence bought a dozen fly papers from the chemist, complaining about the flies in the kitchen. Shortly afterwards, she bought another 2 dozen from another shop. Servants found these fly papers soaking in a bowl on her bedroom washstand, covered by a plate and a folded towel. Florence explained later that she was extracting the arsenic from the fly paper for the use in a face wash mix with lavender and alder water and applied with a handkerchief, a recipe used by many of her friends in Germany. Now, okay, this might sound ridiculous in today's standards, but back in the 19th and 18th century, many women would use small amounts of arsenic to lighten their complexions. It was like a beauty regiment, or whatever you want to call it back then. So James Maybrick was taken ill on 27th of April 1889 after self-administering a double dose of strychnine. I overcomplicated that for no reason. Of strychnine. He recovered and went back to work, only to fall ill again after eating dinner that Florence prepared for him. His doctors treated him for acute dyspepsia, whatever. I can't pronounce that name. I do apologize. Okay, but after they started treating him for this, his condition deteriorated. Another doctor was called in, and Florence immediately engaged a nurse to take care of him. But while James laid ill, Florence, with probably the worst timing in the world, began writing to Brearley. Now, Brearley, as we can remember, was the guy she had an affair with, and the one that James found out about. So she gave this letter to Alice Yap to post for her. Miss Yap was one of the children's nannies, but she also was very, very well versed in the gossip regarding the soaking of the fly papers. So she conveniently dropped the envelope in the mud and that meant she had to replace the envelope. So while transferring the letter, certain words caught her eye, and she felt obliged to deliver the letter to one of Mr. Maybrick's brothers. The letter began, "Dearest," and went on to say, "Since my return, I have been nursing M night and day, and he is sick unto death. I cannot answer your letter fully today, my darling, but relieve your mind of all fear of discovery now or in the future." Yap gave this letter to Edwin. Edwin himself, by many accounts one of Florence's lovers, shared the contents of the letter with his brother Michael Maybrick, who was effectively the head of the family and who also hated Florence. By Michael's orders, Florence was immediately deposed as mistress of her house and held under house arrest. On the 9th of May, a nurse reported that Florence had I'm just going to leave that word out, that Florence had tampered with the Valentine's meat juice bottle that was afterwards found to contain a half grain of arsenic. Florence later testified that her husband had begged her to administer it as a pick-me-up. However, he never drank its contents. Maybrick died at his home on 11th of May, 1889. In her memoir, Mrs. Maybrick's own story, My 15 Lost Years, Florence describes the following as she knelt down by her late husband's bedside. Death had wiped out the memory of many things. I was thankful to remember that I had stopped the divorce proceedings and that we had become reconciled for the children's sake. So, after he died, his brothers, suspicious as to the cause of death, had his body examined. It was found to contain slight traces of arsenic, but not enough to be considered fatal. It is uncertain whether this was taken by Maybrick himself or administered by another person. But do keep in mind that Maybrick had an addiction to arsenic. So in April 1889, Florence Maybrick was accused of using flypaper containing arsenic from a local chemist's shop and later soaked in a boil of water. After an inquest held in a nearby hotel, Florence was charged with his murder and stood trial at St. George's Hall, Liverpool, before Mr. Justice Stephen. The medical evidence in this trial was shaky in the extreme. The defense called several doctors who said that James has died from gastroenteritis, and a number of witnesses who testified to his habit of taking arsenic as a pick-me-up. The moral evidence, however, was damning. Florence was guilty of betraying her husband and was therefore only too likely to be guilty of a murder, founded upon profligacy and adultery. In the words of the prosecutor, Mr. Justice Stephen took 12 hours to sum up, rambling frequently, often confusing the facts and mistaking the dates. His belief in Florence's guilt was clear enough. For a person to go on deliberately administering poison to a poor, helpless sick man upon whom she has already inflicted a dreadful injury, an injury fatal to married life, must indeed be destitute of the least trace of human feeling, he told the jury. You must remember the intrigue which she carried on with this man, Braley, and the incredible thought that a woman should be plotting the death of her husband in order that she might be left at liberty to follow her own degrading vices. Needless to say that the jury followed his lead and found her guilty. She was convicted and sentenced to death. Her trial was reported in newspapers as being a miscarriage of justice, as the prosecution evidence was baffling. After the verdict, crowds shouted in favor of Florence, believing she was being accused of a murder she did not commit. So after this public outcry, Henry Matthews, the Home Secretary and Lord Chancellor Halsbury, concluded that the evidence clearly establishes that Mrs. Maybrick administered poison to her husband with intent to murder, but that there is ground for reasonable doubt whether the arsenic so administered was in fact the cause of his death. The death sentence was then commuted to life imprisonment as punishment for a crime with which she was never charged. During the 1890s, the evidence was publicized by Florence's supporters, but there was no possibility of an appeal, and the Home Office was not inclined to release her in spite of the strenuous efforts of Lord Russell of Killowen, the Lord Chief of Justice. So this case became something of a cause célèbre and attracted considerable newspaper coverage on both sides of the Atlantic. Arsenic was then regarded by some men as an aphrodisiac and tonic, and Maybrick had certainly taken it on a regular basis. A city chemist confirmed that he had supplied Maybrick with quantities of the poison over a lengthy period, and a search of the Battle Crease house, which is where they lived, later turned up enough to kill at least 50 people. Although her marriage was clearly over in all but name, Florence had little motive to murder her husband. The financial provision Maybrick had made for her and his children in his will was paltry, and she might have been far better off with him alive, but legally separated from him. Many people held the view that Florence had poisoned her husband because he was about to divorce her, which in Victorian society would see her ruined. An even more compelling motive might have been the prospect of losing the custody of her beloved children. Following the commutation of Florence's sentence, she was transported to Woking District Female Convict Prison, where she remained until 1896. When she was moved, then she was moved to Aylesbury Prison. Florence spent her first 9 months in solitary confinement before being moved to a different cell, but remaining under the strictures of the silent system, whereby silence was enforced at all times. Her memoirs reveal the physical and mental toll that solitary confinement had on her. She dubbed the practice by far the most cruel feature of English penal servitude, and emphasized the dissolution and despair that the hopeless monotony and confinement led her to feel. During her time at Woking, Florence suffered from insomnia and frequent ill health, caused, she claimed, by the frequent shrieking and destruction of the content of cells during the night by weak-minded inmates, which left her with quivering nerves and unable to sleep. Having passed through the first stages of solitary confinement and a probationary period, Maybrick then entered a third stage of hard labor, whereby she was permitted to leave her cell during the day to assist in carrying meals from the kitchen. A day commenced at 6 a.m. and ended at 5:30 p.m., during which she had, according to her memoirs, to wash 10 4-quart cans, scrub one 20-foot table and two 12-foot dressers, clean knives, wash a sack of potatoes, assist in serving the dinners, and scrub a piece of floor 20 by 10 feet. During 1896, Maybrick entered into the prison infirmary for 2 weeks, suffering from a feverish cold caused, she claimed, by the inadequate clothing, bedding, and draughty cells. It was at the end of her time in the infirmary on 4th November 1896 that she was transferred to Aylesbury Prison. Maybrick did speak well of the warders she encountered during her incarceration, describing their patience, civility, and self-control. So after detention in Woking and Aylesbury prisons, Florence was released in January 1904, having spent more than 14 years in custody. Although she had lost her US citizenship when she married her British husband, it was restored when she returned to her home country. Initially, she earned a living on the lecture circuit, speaking on prison reform and protesting her innocence. In later life, she moved to Connecticut and used her maiden name Florence Elizabeth Chandler. After some months spent unsuccessfully as a housekeeper, Florence became a recluse, living in a squalid 3-room bungalow in Gaylordsville, Connecticut, a village in New Milford, Connecticut, with only her cats for company. A few sympathetic residents eventually discovered Florence's true identity, but kept her secret. Florence Maybrick died alone and penniless in her home in New Milford on 23rd of October 1941, at the age of 79. And the next day, her obituary was published at the top of page one of the New York Times. She was buried at her request next to her dear friend Clara Dulon in South Kent, Connecticut, on the grounds of South Kent School. Among her few possessions were a scrapbook with newspaper clippings of her former life and a tattered family Bible. She never saw her children again. They were raised by the family's doctor. Her son, who became a mining engineer, died in 1911 of accidental poisoning when he mistook a cyanide solution for a glass of water. Soon after her release, Florence wrote a book about her experiences, Mrs. Maybrick's own story, My 15 Lost Years, which is available online, and a rare copy is still held by the Liverpool City Libraries. Now, the reason I chose this specific case is actually easy. I was reading a book. The book's name is The World's Most Famous Killers. Now, in this book, they have categories of the killers. I'm just gonna read you, yeah. So there's cases from history, complex motives, unbalance of mind, guilty or innocent. Now, the section guilty or innocent is where I, for the first time, read of Florence Maybrick. So I've never heard of her before in my life. And so I started reading because last night I was sitting and I was like, okay, I'm gonna need to do some research because I want to do the first episode again in a while. And first I was leaning towards Vlad the Impaler, and because I mean that's just so horrific as well. But then I was like, nah, but okay, let's be honest. The things that I found on the internet and the words, I was just not up to trying to pronounce the words they use there. And then Elizabeth Bathory crossed my mind. I'm like, but I can't. We already did an episode on her many months ago. My co-host Alicia actually did that episode, so I was like, nah. So I took this book off my shelf and I'm like, let's just see, let's get some inspiration here. So first I opened the book and I read about, let me just get this guy's name as well. I read about Cesare Borgia and I was like, oh, this guy was sick. But anyway, and then I actually read the index because I don't know if a lot of people do this, but I don't really read indexes. And then I saw Guilty or Innocent. So I went to the first and I went to Florence's tale. And as I read it, so many things didn't make sense to me at all. Like there was people that was witnesses in the case telling them, listen, but this guy did actually take arsenic as a pick-me-up, and a chemist even came to testify that, listen, this guy bought so many from me and all these things. And I mean, he was the one that he cheated on her first. Okay, I'm not saying fix her wrong with the wrong. Please don't get me right. Please don't get me wrong. But I mean, she was 17 when they married. Well, actually 18. I'm not sure because in the book they said she was 17 when they met. But if you go online on Wikipedia, they said she was 18. So I don't know if they only said that on Wikipedia to make it a bit more legal in today's terms. But I mean, like I said, in the 1800s, things were different. But I mean, he was 42 and she was 17. Even if she was 18, that is still a high difference between ages. Okay, so he has already lived life. He has experienced things, and here he meets this vivacious young girl, and she's just up for life. And I mean, it's a 25-year age gap between them. Like I said, he was old enough to be her father. And yes, of course, and I think the age gap played a role in why James cheated on her so many times, because no matter how well you've been raised or what etiquette classes you used to go to, for you to have an age gap with someone for of 25 years, there's a lot of living, and there's a lot of things that can happen in 25 years that he has lived, and he has come knowledge to his knowledge, and he's picked up the street smarts and all these things. And her at 17 or 18 even have not even experienced 2% of what he has experienced in life. So I'm guessing, and I'm not only spitballing here, people, please don't quote me on this, that somewhere in their marriage, after the kids came along, or even before, he got tired of her or bored even. So that's why he kept on going. And I also read somewhere that he kept on going in between England and America. So he was gone for months on end. I mean, this is not today's age where you can get on a plane and be back in 2 3 days again. It's not how it worked back then. Back then you get on a ship and you go and then you come back, and I think it took a bit of a time to travel that. So yes, it was easy for him to catch up on these affairs and get women where he wanted them. But I mean, for the fact that and I mean, Florence knew about the 5 kids, but for the fact that he just had them and expected her to be okay with it without saying anything, it just shows you the mindset that was in the 1800s. But anyway, and so, I mean, she probably also, in the time that he went on these business trips and was gone from home for so long, I mean, she's young, she's a woman, and she's human. So I'm thinking Burley was a good friend, and he gave her the attention that James didn't. And that's how that affair unraveled. And I know Edwin Maybrick also says that she had him as a lover. I mean, but that's on hearsay. That's what he said. It's never been confirmed, but I mean, how desperate must you be to bed your brother's wife? That's just. But yeah, again, back then things were done differently. But I just think maybe if Florence didn't marry James, or if they didn't get married while she was this young, things might have worked out differently. But in my honest opinion, I don't think she's guilty. I think they convicted an innocent woman who had to spend 15 years of her life in prison. And when she got out, she had to do something to make a living, but it didn't work out because, I mean, early 1900s, it wasn't, again, it's not today's day and age where women can go and have a career and be able to afford houses and cars on their own. It wasn't this. It was a differently, I mean, she had to do housekeeper work. And I think because obviously she had a criminal record, and with that, even in today's day and age, she can't get a proper job with a criminal record. And I mean, if you got behind you, you're a murderer, I think it's just 10 times worse. So I honestly think they convicted an innocent woman because of the times they lived in. If this same case happened today, she would not have been convicted because of the evidence, because of the doctors testifying, listen, he didn't die of arsenic poisoning, he died of this. There's not enough arsenic poisoning in his body to be the cause of death. And then also the chemists, everyone testifying, but listen, he did take it. He used it as a pick me up. I I supplied him multiple times over the years. So this guy had a problem with it. It's nothing new in this society, but then again, you could even see that the judge or whatever he was over this case, he was just like, well, you cheated, you did unforgiving injustice towards your husband already, and you wanted out the marriage, so you killed him. That's it, point blank. That is what he thought, and the jury just went with it, unfortunately. And I am so thankful for the people that went out and made a ruckus about it and said it was a miscarriage of justice, because it was, and got her sentence reduced from being killed. Well, what do they call it? I just read it. From getting her sentence reduced from the death penalty or the death sentence to just life in prison. Listen, it's still, I guess if you get a life in prison, it's still basically a death sentence towards you, because you lose so much. I mean, she lost her children. She never saw her children again. And that's one of the reasons why she probably didn't want to divorce him, because she didn't want to lose her children, and in the end she did. So yeah, people, I don't know. I just, there's so many things that plays a role here. Yes, the letter that she wrote to Burley while she was attending to her husband's last days was damning, to say the least. But again, circumstantial. It's nothing in that letter said, don't worry, we won't be held liable for killing my husband. I think what she meant in that letter was, don't worry, no one will know about us, about the relationship that kept clearly continued. Um, I think that's what she meant in the letter. And if this little Miss Yap, like yap, you see yapping, she did too much yapping, and that's why she took the letter to James's brother. If she didn't get the letter, then nothing, she wouldn't have been convicted. So it's all circumstantial. It's things that has had a ripple effect on her getting arrested. And yeah, like I said, I honestly think she's innocent. I don't for one second think she killed her husband. He killed himself by dosing himself with too much strychnine, and well, strychnine did have arsenic in it, so that's why he used it. But yeah, this is just, this case, it actually made me sad, because a woman so young, she had so many things ahead of her, and she had life to live, things to see, kids to raise, and because of an unfortunate timing and a ripple effect of everyone's actions, she got placed in jail and lost her kids in the process. And she even lost her husband. I mean, yes, there was problems between them, but she was still by his side. Even though she sat and wrote a letter to her lover, I mean, she didn't have to be by his side and take care of him, but she still did it. So, and I think that point where they said he fell ill again after eating a dinner that Florence prepared, I think that was just a convenient thing that someone placed in there. I mean, that's not a proven fact. I mean, they had servants, so why would she be preparing dinner if they had servants? Doesn't make sense. See, there's too much things that doesn't make sense. But let me just be honest. I mean, if I married someone who had a 20-room mansion, sure, I'd be happy. I'd be happy. Like, we don't even have to see each other. Like, 20 rooms is a big place. I'll put pictures up on Instagram and Facebook about the house they lived in. It was gigantic. Like, And I mean, I think the reason that Florence in the first place married James is because she was born into wealth. And um, her mother clearly spoiled her rotten. I mean, taking your 17-year-old to a trip and a tour of Europe is, I don't think it was very cheap back then. So, yes. But yeah, people, that is my 10 cents on the matter. Yes, that's our first episode. I'm going to try and do one episode per week for you guys. Please be patient with me. It's not easy doing a podcast on your own, I'm not gonna lie, because I'm so used to talking and then we pause and then we'll have a little conversation about what just happened and then I'm on my own again. But we can do this. I'm here for your entertaining purposes. So please give me a like, give me a shout if you want me to do some research or on something and talk about it. Please give me a comment, send me a message on Facebook or Instagram, or send me an email. All these things are on our Facebook page. You can go and find it there. And yeah, this will conclude the episode for today. It's a short one, but I hope you enjoyed it. And next week I might have a little surprise for you guys. A little mind scratcher, which also relates to the Maybricks. So yeah, guys, please be safe out there, be kind, and do you. Bye.